Great. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the September 19th Global Power Platform Admins User Group. Really excited to have you all here today, as usual. We've got a great guest with us today, Mike Ochs, and we're going to talk about extending pipelines. And I think this is something that we've all been really interested in and excited to see. So again, it's like we always like to talk about, we are a welcoming community. We are a community dedicated to furthering the knowledge, to maintain and support the Power Platform, as well as being, again, an open and inclusive community. So again, thank you for being part of it. We can't do it without you. And what's new and what's coming up? So the ALM office hours are this Thursday, September 21st. I put this in as the UTC because I'm in Mountain Daylight time, and I always say MST or MDT. Realize that those are actually wrong. So what I did is UTC. So it's 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. UTC, and I'll let you all do the math on that one for where you're at. And then obviously the Microsoft Power Platform Conference is coming up October 3rd through 5th. We're excited to see a bunch of you there, and looking forward to getting a chance to actually catch up in person. And then the September 2023 COE starter kit release is out there, and there are also a lot of new features and functionality with ALM as well, which I don't think we'll be talking about so much today, but just so that you know that they are out there. We blew past the COE office hours. Those were last week, but you can catch these coming up on Thursday. And then for the Power Platform Conference on the 4th of October, we are going to be hosting live. Akash and I will be doing this from 2 to 2:45 Mountain Daylight Time. Actually, I need to take that back. That is wrong. It's actually, so it's 1 to 1:45 Vegas time, and I swear I got to figure out all of these, so I'll update that. But if you are there, we're gonna try and find a room, and Ashley Feltz is trying to get that set up for us right now. So hopefully we'll have a room. If not, we'll do like we did last year. We'll grab a table at the back of one of the halls, and we'll get a chance to talk. We will have Ken and Sean from the Low Code Approach podcast joining us, and hopefully we can talk some other PowerCat stars into coming and joining us. And I think it's going to be a really good opportunity. Last year we had a great time getting to know each other, and so we're really excited about that again. And let's see, we move to the next one. Okay, so welcome to Mike. Mike has been here actually with us before talking about the ALM pipelines. That was actually almost about a year ago, I think, Mike.
Yeah,
and Mike is Executive Vice President and Microsoft Power Platform MVP at Excellence. Is it Excellence? Am I saying it right?
Yep, you said it.
Excellent.
Yep.
Okay, all right. So Mike has we've been hearing some stuff that Mike has been saying in some other groups, and Akash and I were really excited to get some of Mike's time to show how he's extending pipelines, and we're just so excited to have you here today. So Mike, I will give you the floor, and take it over.
Okay. My dog is in the background here. I can't blur, so if he gets up and walks around, pay him no mind. All right, here we go. I'm going to start, and as I mentioned before everybody joined, is that showing the presenter slides, or is that showing?
Yeah, we're seeing your presenter slide.
All right, let's try this again.
And while Mike gets this going too, if you have any questions, feel free to just drop them into the chat, and then we'll kind of try and find good times to interject, and be as interactive as you want to be on this.
All right, there we go. Yeah, so as I mentioned before everybody joined, I'm going to try to deep dive as much as possible into the admin specific aspects of what we're doing with the pipelines for Power Platform and the ALM Accelerator. I haven't had a chance to actually really deep dive into that stuff. I've done some more demos of sort of the surface level, what you see when you go to deploy and sort of what happens a little bit on the back end. But I'm going to try to blow through these slides as quickly as possible and really get down into how to set up some of the stuff that we're doing and how it all works behind the scenes. So Andrew gave me a great introduction, so I'll skip over this slide and move on. We're going to talk about, there is a lot of options for ALM out there today. There's pipelines, which is new, fairly new, I guess. It was end of last year that it was first released, or early this year that it was first released. And there's been some updates since the initial release. So that is the direction forward for ALM in the platform, and they will be continuing to make updates to that and add more features. And so if you haven't checked it out yet, I highly recommend it, and we'll take a look at some of the features of that today. Build tools, which has been out there for a very long time, continues to grow and improve. There's a lot of work ongoing at Microsoft on the build tools and the automation. Build tools are all built on top of Pack CLI, so a lot of investment in Pack CLI, which is the development CLI command line interface for Power Platform. And those build tools are the sort of tasks that you can add to your DevOps pipelines or your GitHub workflows to automate some of the ALM processes. And then we've got the ALM Accelerator for Power Platform, which the last time I was here, I talked about. And the ALM Accelerator for Power Platform is built on top of the build tools. It's it's a reference implementation for how you could take those build tools and take other PowerShell tools and things like that and put them together and create an end-to-end pipeline for your application lifecycle management. And it's meant to be a reference. You can use it as is, or you can take it and make it your own. It's all open source. So that's the tool that PowerCat builds on top of the platform capabilities. And then we will talk about best fit and best practice, but we will also talk about the direction that we're going with the accelerator and how we're going to incorporate all of these things into a single space. Obviously, as I mentioned, we've got a lot of options out there today. You can still manually export and import. If you're still doing that, it's probably fine. But as you get to sort of enterprise scale, or your org-wide type of applications that that need to be deployed in a repeatable fashion without a lot of manual intervention, probably want to move on to using some of the tools that are available for ALM. So pipelines and Power Platform. The pipelines and Power Platform is, and obviously we're talking to the right audience in that first bullet there. The setup of pipelines is very straightforward. I'm not going to actually show the setup today, but it's from install to having your first pipeline is less than 2 minutes, as it says here. Well, the install takes a little bit longer than 2 minutes because it has to import a solution. But as far as configuring it once it's imported, it's pretty quick to get set up with. And then the idea behind it is that you don't have to context switch. You're making apps and flows and model-driven apps and plugins or whatever it may be inside of Dataverse and inside of a solution in Dataverse. Then you can deploy from the Maker portal directly, to downstream environments without having to context switch out of where you're used to and where your makers are used to doing their development work. And then there's also capabilities coming to Pack CLI. There's some capabilities already in Pack CLI for automating, for developers to be able to automate this whole pipeline process as well. In June, which is the latest release, and I think if you're going to the Power Platform conference, you're going to get some exciting new updates as well on pipelines. But as of right now, the current release, they introduced a lot of capabilities that folks were asking for, extensibility being the big one for us because we wanted to be able to leverage pipelines for Power Platform for our internal use. So PowerCat builds the COE starter kit, builds the automation kit, the creator kit, the ALM accelerator, and a couple of other tools, open source tools. And we use the ALM accelerator today to do our ALM, but we want to move to using pipelines for our ALM. So being able to extend what is currently the capabilities of pipelines is very important to us internally, but it's also important to the customer, to our customers, because the more we can get out of the business of building sort of a custom app on top of Dataverse and on top of Power Platform to do this stuff, we want to use those, and customers want to use those internal, Microsoft supported tools to be able to do their ALM. So the extensibility was a big one. Obviously, the other capabilities here, as far as approvals and scheduling deployments, also important. But the extensibility is what we're going to discuss mostly today. And with that, I'm going to start a demo of pipelines for Power Platform. And I'm going to begin by, I'm going to start from the beginning. So let's go over to PPAC. And if you want to get started with pipelines for Power Platform, you can install the pipeline host in PPAC. So I can go in here and just search up an environment. Say this one. I actually think I already have it installed in this environment.
And Mike, I think we're still just seeing your the pipelines for Power Platform demo. Awesome. Thank you.
Other monitor. Okay. Yep. So under Dynamics 365 apps, you'll see I actually already have it installed here. But from here, you can actually install. Go back. Let's go. Let's try. Let's just say, I think I already have it in that one too. We've got it in a couple of places. But if we go to apps here, install app, scroll down to platform pipelines, and there you go. And go ahead and install from there. And that'll install the host, and the host is responsible for orchestrating all of the deployment pipelines, and that would be where, as an admin, you would go in and configure the pipelines. All right, so jumping back now, I've already got it installed in this environment. You guys are seeing some of the latest bits, honestly, like today's bits from a ALM accelerator standpoint. So if there's any glitches, that's maybe why. But this is ongoing work in our October release. Okay, so if we jump to solutions, you'll see once you've installed, there is a, what's it called? It's kind of the name of it is, it's not that. I always forget what the name of the solution is once it's installed. It's not obvious. There it is. App Deployment Anchor Solution. There you go. So this is the app for configuring the solution for configuring your pipelines. Let's go back to apps, and you'll see a deployment pipeline configuration here. Right. If we go to pipelines, I've got a single pipeline set up currently, and that is my ALM accelerator pipeline. Enter a little bit of information here about it, the name, etc. You add your development environment. So I have two development environments. I've got my accelerator dev and my sandbox environment as developer environments. I've got 3 stages in my deployment pipeline: validation, test, and prod. This maps one-to-one with the ALM accelerator. So if you're coming from the ALM accelerator, you can set up your pipelines to mimic the same sort of options that the ALM accelerator has. And then we've got run history here. So every time this is run, you can have a view of what happened for each of those. And that's about it. So as far as setup goes, that's that's the 2-minute, less than 2-minute setup story. So pretty straightforward there. All right, so we've got one set up. We've got a pipeline set up. I'm going to go to my sandbox environment, and we'll take a look at solutions. And I have a pipeline sample here that I created a little while ago. It's got a cloud flow. It's got an environment variable, and it's got a connection reference. Not a whole lot going on there. It will send me an encouraging email, depending on what we put in the environment variable. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy this. Click on the little rocket ship over here. Here's my pipeline. It's available because my dev environment was set up on that pipeline. My Mike Ochs sandbox was set up there. I'm going to click deploy to go to validation. Here's where I can schedule deployment for later, or I can deploy it now. I'm going to go now. And it's going to do a couple of things. So it's going to look for missing dependencies, which is huge ahead of time in the ALM accelerator. In a lot of instances, unless you've rolled your own sort of dependency checker, you won't find out that a dependency is missing until you go to deploy and it yells at you. And that's usually takes a couple of minutes. And so this is ideal that the dependencies are checked up front. You can go back, add those dependencies, run it again, make sure that everything's included that needs to be included. And it's also looking for connection references and environment variables, which we have one here. You can see, there's my mail connection reference. There's already a connection in the downstream environment. It actually just wires it up automatically. Otherwise, you would create a new one from here. So that one's already wired up. Didn't ask me about my environment variable, which it should have. That could be because I already have a value. I think I already have a value on my environment variable, so that may be why. If you don't have a current value, then it should prompt you. But it's gone ahead and it's bumped the version number for me. It's also generated some AI-based deployment notes. So you can see kind of gives, it sends an encouraging message. It did a pretty good job there. We can edit these. There is, in our September release, we have released a sample app and some of the pipelines as well, backing that sample or sample solution for the extensions. There are some quirks about how the AI generated deployment notes get put into Azure DevOps. So just be aware of that if you're going to use the extensions. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. It doesn't like new lines, and sometimes it comes up with Unicode characters and things like that we're trying to fix. But for now, I'll just leave it at this as our deployment notes and click deploy. All right. So it's exporting the artifact. So it's actually going to export the solution and store that solution in Dataverse. So there is a solution artifacts. We're jumping back into the pipeline administration app over here, and these deployment artifacts are store the solution that is being exported from the pipeline here. And what we do in our extensions is we go out and grab that, and then we'll unpack it and put it into Git and etc. So, and we'll look at that after this runs. The extensions capability. So there is a pre-deploy extension which executes after this export, and you can enable that on your stages. If we jump back to our pipeline, look at the stage, you can see there's this pre-deployment step required. So after export of the solution and it's stored in an artifact, you can run a flow that gets triggered prior to it actually deploying. And then your flow is responsible, or it may not be a flow, it may be something else that's listening for the event. But anyway, it will be responsible for writing back to the deployment pipelines, whether it's a success or a failure, and whether to continue with the deployment. So we've got that enabled on all three of these currently. That's still exporting. I'll go ahead and jump back real quick to the slides while that's exporting. Any questions? I'm moving through this really quick because I want to try to be able to show everything end to end. But if there's any questions right now, let me know.
Yeah, we got a good side chat going on here
Okay.
as well. Mark's kind of talking about that with the number of environments.
Okay, cool.
So just to clarify on that
Mark.
really quickly, then on the pre-deployment steps are always firing Power Automate flow.
Yeah, there is a business process. Is that what they're called? Business event. That's what they're called.
Okay.
So there's a business event that gets fired. We've only used Flow to respond to those business events. I think there are other ways to subscribe to them. But yeah, as of right now, what we're doing is using Flow to respond to those business events. And
great.
I'll show what that looks like here in a second, but let's go push through some of this. So the extensibility, as I mentioned, there's a pre-stage. There's also a post-stage. So you can you can run your extension prior to deployment. You can also run an extension after deployment. One of the sort of shortcomings perhaps is your post-stage condition actually happens after the solution is deployed and will have a success or failure notification in the pipeline app in the maker experience. So your post-deployment stage is actually kind of asynchronous, right? Like it'll go off and it'll do stuff. There's really no way to say whether that stuff that happens, asynchronously failed or succeeded. You can put comments back in the pipeline stage run, but it's not necessarily obvious that if something fails in that post stage. So just be aware of that. But you will actually see how we do how we use both of these stages in the ALM accelerator extensions. Build tools. Yeah, I don't think I have too much to really cover here, except that they're an important part of what we're doing with the ALM accelerator extensions. Like I mentioned, we're building on top of those, so it's important to mention those in this presentation. All right, so the ALM accelerator. This is a recap from the last time I was here. For anybody who's not familiar with it, it is an open source project built by a PowerCat team. It is built on top of existing in-product capabilities, and wherever possible, we try to stay up to date with the latest in-product capabilities and deprecate things that we're doing that are now supported in the platform, and and trying to make our footprint as small as possible as new capabilities come into the product. So we do have monthly releases. Thank you, Andrew, for promoting the office hours on Thursday. So we have an office hours every month after our monthly release. This time, it's actually the second Thursday after the release. Generally, it's the first Thursday after the release, but we had a conflict for an internal all-hands meeting on that date, so we had to push it back by a week. But yeah, feel free to come to that, and you'll actually get more than just ALM Accelerator related news. We have some of the product team that joins us as well to discuss in product updates and things that are coming. So that's always exciting. And yeah, so that's the ALM Accelerator. But what's important about the ALM Accelerator, right? This is the app. You can see, the Canvas app that we built that doesn't really hold a candle to what's the in product experience at this point. So it's kind of it works, but it's not ideal because there is a context switch there, and it doesn't feel like an in product experience. But the important part of what the ALM Accelerator is, and the majority of what the work that we've done with the ALM Accelerator is in our pipeline templates. And that is the thing that really drives the ALM process. The app is just a layer that sits on top of those pipelines. So we decided that we were going to leverage the pipeline templates to essentially use the pipelines for Power Platform as the front end, but leverage all of that goodness that we have, those Azure DevOps pipelines that we have, to extend the in-product pipelines. And one of the primary reasons for doing that is pipelines for Power Platform today does not have source code integration. And source code integration is a fairly important piece to the ALM story, for version history, for being able to sort of see specifically what changes are being made on a release by release basis, or an iteration by iteration basis. And so the ability to be able to have source code as well as use the in-product pipelines is huge for us internally. It's also huge for a lot of enterprises that are using that are doing ALM on the Power Platform. So that was our primary goal, but we've also added the ability to do pull request based approvals. So you can do approvals with pipelines for Power Platform using the extensions by kicking off a flow approval. But it doesn't really give you insight into the specific changes that have been made. And using pull requests, you can actually compare side by side the solution updates. They're not always as easy to. There's a lot of noise still in the unpacked solutions. However, you can get down to the specific table or the specific app and see what changes are being made. And you can go back to that history as well and do those comparisons. If something breaks downstream, it's more discoverable why something may have broken. So we took. There's also the ability, and that's important to mention, the extension points. So we have extension points in our pipeline templates that allow you to create your own processes within our pipelines. So if on deploy of a solution, you need to spin up a new environment, you could do that from one of those extensions. We don't do that out of the box in the ALM Accelerator. If you wanted to back up, for example, your environment prior to deployment, you could add in using those extension points in our pipelines. You could probably do some of that through Flow as well, but if you find yourself running up against a wall there, you could always do it using Azure DevOps pipelines. There's some capabilities post deployment that are available, but they're not. We don't have a user interface for them today. So there is a limitation here as far as sharing and ownership, data ingestion. All of that stuff is baked into our pipelines. However, getting that information into Azure DevOps is not straightforward today. So just a limitation that we have that we're trying to enable, but also product team is aware of those things and are working on them as well. All right, so I'm not going to. I'll talk a little bit about this. This is sort of the if I'm going to choose one, which should I choose, and what are the capabilities? We have a post out on the Learn site that has descriptions or more sort of use case descriptions as opposed to just this table that kind of describes the scenarios in which you want to use one or the other of these. But as I mentioned, there is limitations in pipelines today. Source code integration is planned. They are aware of it. It's not available today. The other one is the sharing and ownership, as I mentioned. No, but they are aware and are planning to implement that. Service principal support is another one that is not capable in pipelines today. If you were to install pipelines today, you'd actually have to have elevated permissions in those targeted environments. So a user who's deploying using pipelines would have to have the same permissions as the user who was exporting the solution manually and importing it into that downstream environment. So, and that's usually like system customizer, system admin type level, or I guess if you're just creating connections, well, no, if you're importing a solution, you would still need the elevated permissions. So, yeah, that's a limitation today, but they are working on service principal support. ALM Accelerator has that by default. We use service principals, and then obviously the DevOps build tools have that support because we build on top of those tools. So we get all that goodness from them. Yeah, so if you're going to roll your own, you could start from scratch with the DevOps tasks tools and GitHub actions. Probably, probably not the best place to start. You may want to start with the ALM Accelerator because it already provides sort of those templated pipelines for you, and you still are using sort of the Power Platform build tools. And then, if you don't have source code integration requirements and you're just kind of, exporting and importing manually today, then pipelines per Power Platform is probably the best place to start because it'll simplify that whole process, and obviously the ability to do dependency checks and things like that up front makes that a little bit cleaner. Okay, so I've been more than hinting at this. It was like this was supposed to be the surprise slide. Like, surprise, we've extended pipelines. But no, let's actually look at the pipeline extensions that we've built based on our ALM Accelerator templates. Let's get out of here. And I've got something that failed there, but this I don't believe is the right.
No, I'm on the pipelines call. You guys doing something? Oh, yeah, I won't make it.
Hey, Blake,
Yeah,
you're not on mute.
I know that voice.
Oops, sorry, guys. Lunchtime.
Okay, so we ran our pipeline over our sample app, and we can see it actually deployed successfully 4 minutes ago. That's awesome. If we go over to Azure DevOps and we look at where did that deploy? Oh, I think I put it into here. Well, that's okay. All right. Well, there it is. I put it in test 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'll show you how it found that. I actually wanted to go into that admin UG project in Azure DevOps. But so what happened here? Jump back over here and let's go to our pipeline host, which is ALM Accelerator Dev, and go to solutions. And we've got this solution here called Center of Excellence Pipeline Accelerator. As I mentioned, we released this solution as a sample in the COE starter kit. It's there for you to play around with. It's not 100% feature complete as far as having configurability and things like that. It's kind of everything's a bit hard coded into the flows today, but it'll get you started and it'll help you understand the concept and sort of a default scenario if you were to use the extensions from ALM Accelerator. Let's look what's in here. So we've got an app. This is the administration app. I'll come back to that. We've got some flows in here. Most importantly, the flows that we have are our pipeline pre-deployment and our pipeline post-deployment. And if we drill down into that, and remember I said pre-stage happens when after export and before deployment. So if we look at what this flow looks like here, we've got when an action is performed, and let's edit this. We've got admins on here and probably some advanced makers as well. So there's a new category here for Power Platform pipelines for actions, and there is a new action called on pre-deployment started. Pretty straightforward. I haven't used deployment requested. There is documentation, deployment started. I haven't used that one. And pre-deployment started. I haven't used those. The only ones I've used so far is on pre-deployment started and on deployment completed so far. But there is documentation out on Learn on what all of these things are and where in the process they kick off. So effectively what this flow does is it goes out and it looks for information about Azure DevOps and where we want to store, unpack, and commit our solution when this trigger happens. So after the solution was exported, it was stored in Dataverse. This kicks off, it goes out and get some information about the stage run, which we looked at, which that was under the deployment history in the Pipelines admin app. It looks at the stage itself. It will retrieve what's called a profile, and the profile is something that you configure in the pipeline accelerator. We can take a look at that here in a second. And then it kind of goes down and it tries to find the export unpack pipeline, finds a working branch if there is one. If it doesn't, it'll create its own working branch. And then ultimately way down here at the end, it runs an export pipeline in Azure DevOps, and it runs it with a bunch of parameters that it collected above. This export pipeline, if you're using the ALM accelerator, is very similar to the export pipeline that runs with the ALM accelerator. There's a few additional parameters that get passed in that pass in sort of the pipeline information in addition to branch to create, things like that. But this is effectively the same as what the ALM accelerator export pipeline takes in. Now, I mentioned the profile. Let's take a look at that. This is the apps. All right, so we've got our ALM Accelerator Power Platform Administration app. This app comes with the Pipeline Accelerator, and you can use this to essentially configure the Pipeline Accelerator or the ALM Accelerator, whichever you're using. So it should feel familiar to those of you who are using the ALM Accelerator. If we look at deployment profiles, and I'm just going to sort these, sort it like that. That's fine. So I have one out here called admin UG, and you can see it went to our test 1, 2, 3, 4 project because that's what I had in here because I was testing something prior to this. So this is the name of the profile. I've actually set this deployment profile as the default, and the default profile is sort of a fallback profile if you haven't explicitly assigned a profile to a solution. So if you're getting started with the Pipeline Accelerator, you can set up one of these default deployment profiles, and basically everything will go to that Azure DevOps project And we don't have a good way of assigning profiles to specific solutions today. You kind of have to have the ALM Accelerator app to do that, or you have to hand jam some deployment request information in there. There's not a great way to do it today as far as assigning specific profiles to specific solutions. So that's why we have this default if you just want to put it into a single Azure DevOps project. We've got our repository here. That's sort of our default repository. And then we've got our steps. So we looked at our stages in pipelines. These are steps in the ALM Accelerator world. And they map one-to-one with the stages in our pipeline. So validation, test, prod. There is some overlap in the information that's being saved on the deployment steps and the deployment stage. Obviously the name of the step and the stage are the same. The environment information. So there is some duplicated information here, but in the interest of trying to, one of our goals with this is to try and get people on a migration path to using pipelines who are currently using ALM Accelerator. So if you already have your deployment profile set up in ALM Accelerator and it looks like this, which is sort of the default, then you can simply set up a pipeline in Pipelines for Power Platform with the same 3 stages and the information required there, and it will just work with your existing profile. So yes, we probably could normalize this a little bit more so we're not duplicating things in 2 different entities or 2 different tables. But for a sort of clean upgrade path, this is a good. There's not a lot of information to enter here, double enter anyway. So this is a sort of a starting point for that. Yep. So that's pretty much it on the profile side. I will run through the project setup real quick. Maybe I should have done this earlier, but we do have this project wizard that'll get you started. Once you've installed the pipeline accelerator, you can run this app. And if I pick my Azure DevOps organization here, go to new project wizard, and we say, this is my admin UG demo project. This is Azure DevOps project name. I can give it a description, select the process, and I can enable preview features here. So the only preview feature that's out there today is the Canvas Unpack. And if you can choose to use it or you can choose not to. And the reason that it's still preview is because I believe Canvas Unpack is still experimental. I don't even think it's beta as of today. So if you want Canvas Unpack, you'll need to enable that preview feature explicitly. Otherwise, you'll just end up with a .ms app in your repo as opposed to the actual exploded Canvas app code. If I click next, it's going to ask me what version of the pipeline templates to install. I actually have a tag out there today for this pre-release, so I can install that latest release, or I can select from, I can install the September release, etc. So if I have a need to go back, I can. But let's not do that. Let's install the October release. I'm going to install this into a new template repository. I could choose an existing project and an existing repository if I wanted to, but I'm going to go ahead and just install it into a new one inside of that project. All right. Now I've got my environments. So the environments involved in this process. ALM Accelerator Dev, that's where my pipeline host is today. So I do need to select the pipeline host environment. I've got a prod, test, validation environments, and then I've also got my development environment, which is Mike Ochs Sandbox. And that's it. let's put some information. I think this is actually stored on here. Let's just put that in there. And over here, grab my secret. And I'm going to share that with all pipelines. Otherwise, you would have to, if you don't share it with all pipelines, you would have to manually go in and give permissions to the pipelines to use these service connections that get generated. All right. And the last step is to go ahead and generate the pipelines. This is dual purpose. As I mentioned, this admin project wizard is dual purpose. So it works for the ALM accelerator as well as the pipeline accelerator. Previously, when you would set one of these up, you'd only see export solution to Git, import unmanaged, delete unmanaged. But now there's this new one, which is export solution to Git pipelines. And this is what handles all of that unpack from pipelines and responding back to do the deployment. Okay. All right. We jump into Azure DevOps now. We've got our admin UG demo. We've got this is a pipeline that runs to sync down our templates that are up in GitHub. That's working through that. If we look at our repos, we've got our admin UG demo. We've actually got an ALM accelerator templates repo that hasn't been populated because this pipeline is currently running. And if we look at pipelines, go to all, here's our 4 pipelines that got generated. All right. Any questions? I kind of went out of order there. I apologize. Maybe I could have, could have started with the project wizard to kind of show how to set everything up from beginning to end. But I wanted to kick off the pipeline as soon as possible to because that's the longest process and kind of needed to do some cooking show stuff there. Any questions?
So with so what we're looking at here then is that that ability then to use, because these are I forgot how to say this best, because these are mirrored, then when we're using the Power Platform pipelines, you're having access to this pipeline functionality. Is that correct?
Yeah. So it's the flow basically goes out and the flow finds all the parameters to supply to this pipeline.
Gotcha. Okay.
So if we look at this run, for example, right, we saw those. When we were looking at the flow, you saw all of those parameters that were being passed in. Right, here's our project and our repo, and that maps to that default profile that we looked at earlier. So test 1, 2, 3, 4. Test 1, 2, 3, 4. And then, what else do we have here? So we actually have the pipeline stage run ID, a service connection URL to the pipeline host, and the name is the same there. We've got some options for, do we want to create a PR automatically when we do the export? This is true by default. Do we want to auto-complete that PR? That is false by default, which means that after this ran, there's actually a pull request, or should be a pull request in here for, for that export. If we look at our branches, it creates a branch for you just based on your name and then the name of the solution. So this is the branch that got created when the flow ran the export pipeline. And inside of here, right, look at the source. We got an environment variable. That's my encouraging text. I've got a flow that sends Mike an encouraging email, etc. So here's all of our unpacked code in our GitHub branch, in our Azure DevOps branch. And then if we look at the pull requests, we've actually got that branch going into our solution branch. and our validation ran. So our build validation ran as part of this pull request, and that succeeded. And because that succeeded, did it actually go through? That may be. Let's look at that. Hold on. Let's go back to Sandbox and look at our solution again. Global admins, pipeline sample, development, last deployed. Okay, something. Yeah. Yeah, okay, that may be an issue. So it should have waited because we didn't autocomplete. It should have actually waited to do that deployment until the pull request was completed. So I got to look into that. But yeah, it should run the build validation, which is that right? Yeah. It should run build validation and then wait for the pull request to get completed before it actually deploys to test. Oh, yeah, no, sorry, apologies. So no, that's right. It deployed to build validation. It won't deploy into test until we complete the PR. And yeah, sorry, I confused myself there.
So it allows you to use the functionality of the ALM accelerator when you need it.
Right.
And then, but the maker always has just access to the pipelines, and simpler. They don't have to worry about everything going on behind.
Correct. Yeah, and the pipelines orchestrate the actual deployment. So you'll see pipelines inside of Azure DevOps for deploy. Probably a misnomer because it's not actually deploying. It's simply telling pipelines to go ahead and deploy. But there's going to be and these are actually run. These are post deployment pipelines. So, or post deployment extensions, essentially.
So, Mike, is there, like, let's say if someone is not using the ALM accelerator, right, currently,
Yep.
and they want to use the ALM accelerator pipelines extensibility, is there any
Yep.
documentations for them where they can follow the step-by-step to set up this whole process?
Yes. So currently, that is because this is still sort of sample, still a work in progress. The documentation is out on GitHub. The source code is available for the pipeline extensions. So it's here, Center of Excellence Pipeline Accelerator. And then there's a README here. Happy to take feedback on this, on this doc and how we can extend it. But this is sort of the initial setup guide for the Pipeline Accelerator to get started with it.
That's great. Can you grab that URL? We'll just pop it in here for everybody.
Yep. There you are. Yeah, so let's see. What else do we got here as far as slides? Current slide. Let's see if that. Okay. Yeah. So obviously we saw the unpack and commit. We saw pull request approvals. The ability to build and test code first components is also sort of baked in. There's a flag on the flow or there's a flag or a parameter that you can pass into the export pipeline that says, go ahead and build and run my unit tests during the export process. The ability to write back a solution after you build code first components is not currently supported. It's something that we're looking into because it's something that we need internally for CAT. and a lot of customers will likely be asking for as well, because we want as much as possible for the source code to be the source of truth, as opposed to that artifact that gets generated by pipelines. So we're kind of working through how we can make that work, and build from source control, and then make sure that what's deployed is what is built off of source control. So I talked about sort of some of the abilities to extend. So if you have static code analysis and things like that, you can do those in the ALM accelerator extensions. Not much more to address on this that I haven't already talked about. And so essentially this is what we discussed today. And with that, that's if there are any questions, any lingering questions that Mark didn't answer, because I'm sure he's been.
Yeah, we've had a really good side conversation going in here. And of course, the age-old question, looking forward at all to GitHub? You knew I was going to ask, right?
I can tell you that it's going to simplify. This model is going to simplify a move to GitHub. One of the big issues that we had with ALM Accelerator was just the app on the front end, right? Like if you were to install the app and you wanted to use GitHub, we would have to have a Azure DevOps connector and a GitHub connector in that app in order to do both. And we always thought that would be a confusing and jarring experience for people. Like, I don't have a GitHub account, or I don't have an Azure DevOps instance. Like, how am I going to connect this thing to it? And the alternative was, well, now we have to have two apps sitting side by side, one that has a GitHub connector, one with an Azure DevOps connector, and that's just impossible to maintain. So the good news is this sort of way of doing things helps a lot, because we can just have two solutions with two different flows targeting GitHub or Azure DevOps. But we still have a lot of work to do as far as porting our DevOps templates to GitHub workflows.
But I would say this is an area we would love some community contribution on, right? Because the GitHub team has built a tool set to convert Azure DevOps YAML to GitHub YAML, right? And we just, honestly, it's just about a matter of time and capacity, right? For us, it's not that we don't want to do it. In fact, we do. We want to move our own ALM automation to GitHub workflows from Azure DevOps pipelines, right? But it takes time and resources to do, right? And we're always juggling lots of things. So if somebody in the community wanted to kind of tinker around with the conversion tool and help us understand how far it gets, and collaborate with us on it, we'd probably get there faster, right? Than doing it alone.
Yeah, and
Mark, so if people want to do that, what is the best way to engage? Would it be through the through GitHub there?
Just reach out on GitHub, ask a question or suggest it, right? And we'll reach out and do some side meetings and conversations and figure out something together.
Yeah, and I did run. It's been a couple of months now, but I did run that tool against our pipelines, and it did a fairly reasonable job. I was surprised because our DevOps templates are quite complex, and it did a pretty good job of porting it over, or the initial port. So that would be cool. Even an intermediate step to that would be like we currently use the ALM Accelerator to source control our projects in GitHub, but we still use all Azure DevOps automation to do that. So maybe an interim step would be source control, but still running Azure DevOps pipelines.
That makes sense. Well, I know we're at the end of our time. I don't know if there are any more questions. We can ask them within the community and forward them along to you. I think on behalf of all of us in the community, we really appreciate not only what you all are doing, but also the time you take to come and do these type of things to educate us so that we can do a better job at what we're doing.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely, and well, look for us in a couple weeks, October 4th, at the conference in Vegas, and really hope to see you all. We'll communicate where that will be, and like I said, we're just excited about what we're doing and what we're growing here. Akash, anything you want to add?
Thank you, Mike, Mark. It's we were waiting for this pipeline extensibility when you did the demo in the champion group. So it's really good what you guys are doing. Looking forward to what's coming next on the ALM accelerator for extending, and hoping everyone to see in the Power Platform conference.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.